I have a story for you today. It was Christmas Eve, and the huge 24-hour department store was piping Christmas music throughout the building, as it had for the last month and a half. Jack was working overtime at his stocking job. His work was boring. He had done it for the last year after he had lost a very good-paying job in the oil patch. But as he stocked the shelves for the zillionth time and pushed his large loading cart down the aisles that were now shambles from over-enthusiastic last-minute shoppers, he suddenly thought, if I hear Bing Crosby sing White Christmas one more time, I may just pick up this cart and throw it at the closest Christmas decoration. The past year had been tough. Jack and his wife Sarah, who also worked long hours in another store across town, remortgaged their house, sold some extras like the boat and the quad to pay off debt, but had kept their home. Their income had dropped dramatically. Their two young children, Michael and Jenny, were still excited about Christmas, even though Jack and Sarah had gently suggested that Santa may not give out as many presents this year. In the past year, Sarah and Jack had argued a bit more often, slept a bit less peacefully, tried to cope with a future that was now very uncertain. Jack was to get off in time to join Sarah and the kids for a Christmas Eve supper at his mom's place, and then they had begrudgingly agreed to go to the Christmas Eve service at the local church where Jack had grown up. He hadn't been back in church very often. Life had been busy, other demands upon his time, but mostly he'd begun to wonder if God really was there, if it mattered whether he prayed or not, and whether faith made any difference. And if truth were told, in this last year when he lost his job and their future suddenly was bleak, he was angry at God, he was angry at life, at fate, whatever you want to call it. And so going to church and singing the carols and lighting the Christmas Eve candles seemed like an aggravation. But he had promised his mother. Jack finally said goodbye to Edna and Tom, his co-workers for the shift, and without much enthusiasm muttered, "Merry Christmas." He went out in the cold, late afternoon to start his car and head home, but it didn't turn over. The battery was dead. Oh, that's all he needed. A battery was expensive, and they were out of money because of Christmas until next payday, which was another 2 or 3 weeks. Grumbling and boiling with frustration, he called CAA to get a boost, or if that didn't work, to tow him to the nearest garage. But it was Christmas Eve. A lot of travelers, a lot of cars frozen up, and the next tow truck wouldn't be there for maybe 3 hours, he was told. Great, he thought, as he fought back the tears of frustration, anger, and exhaustion. So he called Sarah and said he'd be late. They talked and decided that, well, maybe his friend Barney, who lived nearby, could boost him and he would get home at least. So he hung up the phone and tried Barney. No answer, of course. So he decided to leave the car and walk home, maybe catch a bus if they were still operating. Yes, finally something was working out, a bus. So he climbed on, he paid, he found a seat on the 3/4 empty bus. He sat down, exhausted, defeated, discouraged, but at least warm. As he sat, he thought about Christmas. So much rushing around, so much stress, so much pressure. He just hated it. And if God was listening, he would tell God that too. The bus did its stops and then picked up a young mom and dad and a tiny baby. They got on. They nodded to Jack with a smile as they sat on the seat just across from him. And then they did what Jack and many others really hate. They began to talk to him. Couldn't they just leave me alone, Jack thought. And not only did they talk, but they were pleasant, and they smiled, and they were kind. All the things that can drive you crazy when you want to be alone, when you are mad at the world, when the world around you seems to have a particular grudge against your happiness. So Jack nodded and listened and watched as this couple with the threadbare coat, the tiny baby, and 1 or 2 small presents sticking out of a bag, talked about how this was their first Christmas together with their new child. And they talked about how this child was a miracle baby because she was born with some heart deformities that needed surgery in the first hours of her life. They talked about how she survived and healed amazingly quickly, and was now strong and happy and blessed them. They talked about how scared they were when she was born, and life seemed like it was all going sideways. They said that in their time of struggle they had received such love and support from family and friends and even the medical people that they had found strength to come through it all. They did get Jack to tell something of his year: loss of work, remortgaging the house, the sadness and anger that comes when your future, as you imagined it, is suddenly taken from you. And he did share that he had a wife and children and were going to be with him for Christmas Eve supper and church. They listened and nodded in a kind way, actually paying attention, Jack observed. And then they did what people like Jack who are struggling in life really can't stand. They talked about God and how good God was to them. Now, to give them credit, they never once preached to him. Never once did they say he should believe a certain way. Never once did they pretend that life was easy and perfect because they had faith. But they did radiate a sense of gratitude and say God must have been at work in their hardship this year because they had felt loved, cared for, not alone, and were amazed at how much stronger they had become as people, as a young married couple, even as a young family. And what was amazing to them was that they had felt hope and they had felt warmth of faith in God's love. They had felt filled them at different times in their hard journey. So they told Jack that this Christmas they were spending it with their small family. They were going to Christmas Eve service later, and they had decided to give back. So they had these small presents that they were taking to an inner city mission that provided a Christmas meal for the homeless. They were going to give the presents and help out at the meal, and show people their miracle baby, and try to make someone else's Christmas better. And then they said, "Oh, this is our stop. Merry Christmas. Enjoy the time with your family," and they left. Jack trudged home. He joined Sarah and the kids at his mom's Christmas meal. He ate, he visited, he tried to be pleasant, and actually achieved it. And then they all bundled up and went to the Christmas Eve service. Jack sang a carol or so. He joined the congregation in a prayer and listened as the familiar story of Mary and Joseph and the birth of their firstborn Jesus was told. And then it hit him. Mary and Joseph's life had not been going particularly well either. The scandal of being pregnant before the formality of marriage had been completed happened at a time when that really was a dangerous situation to be in, particularly for Mary. They were poor, hard-working folk. Joseph a carpenter, Mary a woman raised to care for her home, where food was grown, gathered, and meals prepared by hand, clothes not purchased in a store, but painstakingly made, where a house was small and simple, certainly not as good as Jack and Sarah's. And to add to their experience of life, a census, requiring a 150-kilometer journey to Bethlehem, Joseph's ancestral home, right before Mary was ready to give birth. And then hotels all full, the only space a barn, a feeding trough in which to lay the child. And as Jack listened, he smiled. And he smiled from ear to ear. He couldn't help it. The Christmas Story family came from a life that was hard and filled with trials and surprises and losses, just like he and Sarah had experienced. And yet Mary and Joseph found strength to persevere, to live, to love, to welcome the miracle baby into their lives. And they did so with gratitude, trusting that God was with them, God was working through their ordinary lives, and that this child would create a new life, a new future for all the world. Mary and Joseph showed him, and those willing to listen, how to trust, how to have faith, how to find God in your midst. Just like that young couple on the bus. Suddenly Jack understood. When bad things happen, you have to grieve, you have to be upset, you have to even be angry, you shed many tears, but then you need to move on. You need to remember that God is in the world, and that God's love is near, just like Mary and Joseph found. And so what he needed to do was pay attention and notice the kindnesses, the love, the opportunities, the blessings that still came in the scariest of times, and then trust that these were signs of God's closeness. God knows about losses and hardships, struggles and sorrow, because Jesus and his family knew all those things, Jack thought. And when we remember that we are beloved and not alone, then we can face anything, like Mary and Joseph, like the couple on the bus, like he and Sarah. Jack suddenly felt different. Not a big thing, just a little warmth in his heart. He looked at his wife and his children and all the very ordinary people of the congregation who all had their own stories of joy and sorrow, success and loss, achievement and challenge, and yet all were here to listen to an ancient story about God coming close to a people long ago, but more importantly, still coming close to people now, as they prayed, as they sang, as they remembered the story of Jesus' birth, as they received the Spirit anew through bread and wine. This God was coming close to these people, ordinary people like him. And when the service was over, Jack shook hands with many people he hadn't seen for a while. He gave his mother an extra kiss and thanked her for the wonderful meal and evening. He hugged his wife and picked up his tired children on his shoulder, and they walked home. But somehow he knew life was different. A new beginning, a new birth had taken place for him. He knew now that he and his family in the world were not alone. God was present. A gentle, loving, strengthening, encouraging God was near. And he felt for the first time in years that he could trust this God, and in trusting he would find the strength he needed to do what he needed to do. Keep living and loving, finding the goodness of life in the present, and trusting that no matter what the future held, he could face it because the love born in Bethlehem had touched him. Amen. As we move into our preparation time for communion,